Well, hello, everybody, and welcome. My name is Meredith White, and on behalf of Flag and Klett, we welcome you to episode 8. I think you're episode 8, Kia, of our sort of spring, I know, woohoo, spring and summer webinar series. I am an instructional technology support person, former Spanish teacher here in Metro Atlanta. And today we are joined by the fabulous Kia London, and I'm so excited. I've been looking forward to today all week. And then I was like, all right, is it 11 yet? Like, I've just been sitting here on Zoom, like super excited and waiting. So I hope that's not weird. But we're friends, so I know you get it. Kia, will you tell us where you are and what you're up to these days?
Cool. Well, hey, everybody. So excited to be here. Especially with my friend Meredith.
Yay.
I'm like moving my hand trying to like present. Yeah, I
Silly.
don't know what that was about. Yeah, just super excited. I live in the Chicagoland area. I could give you all the name of the suburb, but when you are from Illinois,
Mhm.
when you give a suburb, people are just like, what? So we just say Chicago. So I'm from the Chicagoland area. I have been teaching Spanish for 17 years. 17 years. Goes by pretty fast. I've literally taught every grade level from kindergarten to 12th grade. And believe it or not, you all, I am actually going back to high school this upcoming year. I just wrapped up like 8 years of like middle school. Middle school, I will always love, like that's like the jam. That's just the glue right there. But I'm super excited to do that. And so this summer, I honestly I've been working, um, but it's good work. I enjoy supporting teachers, reading. I'm trying to get some reading in, but I got, family. My kids are not in camp this summer, so it's a little different.
Definitely.
So it's like every day, like, what are we doing? What's going on? And
Mom.
yeah,
They're
I know
like,
it's like, hey, it's like, yeah, I got it, but it's actually really good for me because I tell my husband this all the time. Um, they really bring a lot of balance,
mm,
which is super helpful. So yeah, so just doing a little bit of relaxing, doing some work and just hanging out.
absolutely. Welcome back to the dark side of high school. It's my favorite. This is my super favorite. But my dad taught for a very long time, was in education like 45 years. His favorite was always middle school. So yeah, he was like, it's a special place. Sixth grade, I think, was his favorite.
Yeah,
Yeah.
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 Hmm.
I think I don't know if I have a favorite, maybe 10th, but I just all of them. They're all different. I will say I've always only ever taught, which I think is kind of a rarity. I don't know if I've just been in places where they were really supportive, but my favorite levels were 1 and 2 early on, very early on. And I've been in places where that was easy. They went, oh yeah, okay, no problem. And nobody was jonesing for like 1 and 2. Usually people are like, want to try the advanced. That's just different, right? So they're trying to like, I'd like to do 4, I'd like to do AP. I'm like, I'd like to do 1, level 1. And they're like, oh, you can have it. Like, I don't know why that is, but I love levels 1 and 2. So I know what you mean. For me, that's not a grade level, but definitely a language level kind of sweet spot.
Yeah. And you know what, I completely agree with you too. And just like, reflecting and just kind of like thinking is at level one and level two, like I love being a part of that foundation
Same.
part, just the foundational period. And, could I do level 3 or 4? Yeah, absolutely, definitely. But just something about building the foundation, making sure they have that strong foundation is great. And yeah, yeah.
Absolutely. I think too, something I don't know, not this is gonna sound some kind of way. I don't mean it to, but like it's also nice to get them fresh. Um, the way that I think that's a challenge that presents itself in the upper levels for sure. When you get somebody and I've been on both sides of that, right? You get kids that you're like in thinking in your head, like, I feel like they should know X, Y, and Z by now, right? You're kind of surprised. Or being the person on the other end where you're like, no, I taught them X, Y, and Z. Like they know that. Don't let them say we didn't speak any Spanish last year. Liars. They are liars who lie. You know what I mean? Like, no, they just don't want to do anything. Like we'd lie too. So I think it's really, really important. Yeah. Like knowing that about myself, that I love one and two. I've got to look up the ladder too and look, like with high school or any kind of feeder program. Cause I know you and I have had personal conversations that way of like what they're going to do next or what. And it's like, you can't, I love being those foundational levels because you can start them fresh and professionally look at where they're going to go and kind of guide it. You're not going like, oh gosh, it's just a whole class of AP kids you've never taught before. And you're like, oh, hope you guys like, this is going to be an adventure because maybe some of you, I don't know how you're going to do on the test. Others, you seem super ready, but I don't know that we ever know what ready is either. So
Yeah, yeah. And like 100% I agree with you is where you mentioned, the ladder, like being able to see, okay, this is where they need to go. This is
yeah,
where they currently are at, like right now. And then too, like even like at my previous school, I was teaching fifth and sixth for 4 years, and then my colleague friend, he was teaching seventh and eighth. And I just remember when I first started there, um, the level of just like where the students were,
right.
especially the sixth graders, they were, I mean, quite a few of them were like intermediate low already and, things like that. Oh, yeah. And I
Like,
mean, the
oh,
program, yeah. And so it was very different from the middle school that I had come from because the previous middle school, I was really building and working with the students on just a lot of comprehensible input, second language acquisition, and getting them,
right.
really into, what it looks like to be proficient. And so transitioning into the previous school that I just finished at, the kids were like already there. So I
Oh,
remember feeling pressure, um, because I had to pass them on in 2 years,
right.
and I didn't want my colleague to be like, "Okay, Kia, did you,
What y'all do for
and
2 years?
I know,
Right.
like, what did you do?" So
Oh,
it was one of those like iron sharpening iron, and really being encouraged to just like step my game up and step the level up. So yeah, yeah.
well, and I think too about your title for today and reflections, and I think that's a really powerful one of iron sharpening iron because I think the knowing you as a friend, like that is, I know that you are a very intentional, confident person, and confident in your competence and all those kind of things. But that's exactly to me what that says when you can go, you know what? Like, time to hit the ground running, baby. Like, the pressure's on in a good way. And iron sharpens out. Like, I got to step up my game. These people around me make me better because I think the opposite of that is a conversation that I don't know that we as a field somehow are ready for still is when you close your door, right? Like when you close your door and you might sit in the course team meeting and go like, and nod and shake your head. And then you close your door and do what you were going to do anyway, which I get it. There's a degree, like sometimes you just go, if you philosophically disagree with something, I'm all for like, do what you got to do, right? You want to teach in a way that sits right, with you, but like also we've got to talk about the unprofessionalism that is the opposite of your mindset, which is just like, well, I definitely, and it's that like insecure thing, it's that defensive thing where people go, I taught that. Well, he didn't do that for me last year. Oh, little Timmy Tommy is sleeping. Well, I never saw that. And it's like the kids again, you're like, you are lying. Like that is not
Right.
true. This is the same Timmy Tommy that we've all known. Like, like we work with kids, like be real,
Yeah.
be on it. And
Yeah.
it's like, and as adults too, like to me, it's like really effective teamwork or parenting or whatever, where being on the same page really is super helpful, I
Oh
think.
God. Yeah.
And you know what I mean? Like as a course, so you're not
Yeah.
undermining each other and undermining yourself where you're like, well, who did you have last year? And it's like, just like look it up in the LMS like we all do.
Yeah.
You're allowed to wonder that and be like,
Right, right.
but don't ask a
Yeah,
student that. So I just really appreciate, I love that you're like, yeah, iron sharpens iron. Like, I better do some good stuff because if not,
yeah,
these kids are already killing it because who wins when that's your mindset? Kids.
yeah, yeah. And that's what it is, it's that accountability and not being afraid of having accountability.
Yeah.
Because I
A
think
word.
too, like sometimes, within our profession, like we can have a tendency to take things personally. And
Like,
so, I mean, like and I went through it. Like I went through it. I'd be like, okay, maybe but the thing about it too is like we have to keep in mind that when students are coming in, they're coming in with their academic backpack and they're also coming in with their SEL backpack, their social emotional learning backpack. We don't know what's going on at home. We don't know what happened the period before, if they got some crazy text message or something, blew up, or no, I don't want to say blew up, but meaning contextually, like, they're in a group chat. I mean, I went through that where it was just, I'll never forget it. Like, this was when I was being observed.
of course it was.
I, it was when I was being observed. So, like, I'll never forget it. My department chair, I have a great, incredible relationship with her. She is amazing, and we still, talk to this day. And so, I remember she was observing me, and it was a day where like all my fifth graders like came in, and they came in and they started talking about stuff that happened during recess, and I was like,
God,
okay, but
right.
yeah, it's like okay, but then at that point again, like I remember I said, okay, I'm going to address what's going on. So I ended up addressing it. I said, I don't know what happened, but obviously something happened, and you all are, I'm reading the room. You're in some kind of mood. Something is happening. So we're just going to switch out this activity. Initially, I wanted you all to come in and chit chat with your partners based on the question. Now I want you to journal. And it was one of those where it was the best thing
Wow.
I could have done. And so they ended up journaling. Some of them drew out how they were feeling based on, what happened. And then about 15 minutes later, they were ready to get up and talk. And so, with that in mind, like really going back to what do the students need? How are we centering them? How are we not centering the students? And I know that we have, I know that we have an agenda and we have curriculum, and there's 5 million things that maybe some of us need to get through. But at the end of the day, it's we've got to look at, what's happening in our classroom. And when something like that happens, or if a student walks in and clearly they're not themselves or something, not taking it personally, but really, checking in. And I mean, and it's not easy to do. I can think of a few times middle schoolers are so honest, and sometimes they're a little too honest. And I'm like,
You're like,
I'm like,
okay.
I'm like, okay, keep that with yourself, But where I checked in, where I've been like, hey, like, what's going on? Like, I noticed, did you, and I'm like, oh, no, Profe, it's not you, it's just something, and it goes a long way when we, do that brief check in,
Right.
and really being mindful of that so that we're not, taking things, personally. And I remember somebody told me this, or I was reading this somewhere, where just having that mindset of, especially as a teacher being in the classroom, and we're constantly thinking that, well, the student must be upset because
Mm,
of me,
right.
or, and it's kind of like, it's kind of selfish. Like and like, it's like, no, like this isn't all about,
And
me or us here. Like the
all
student is
it is.
going through something.
Yeah.
Yeah, so and
Hey,
that's yeah. So
Well, and especially when it's like a literal child. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, when did you like you're right. It like feels like self-important to think like they're not upset about your class. Like they like you said, they just got like broken up with their little like seventh grade crush, right before this or whatever. Like that's a big freaking deal.
Yeah.
Um, and I think I often reflect on that of like how personal teaching is and as a person who's already just living like living every day as just a hyper self-conscious person, I know my automatic thought is, or as my students, anytime we saw an animal on this recent trip that you and I were talking about before we got on here, um, to South Africa, it was so funny. We'd get close to like zebras or just something so freaking beautiful or cute or like the little baboons or whatever. And two of the students, this must be like a viral like phrase that's going around or whatever, but they would go, "Oh my gosh, my intrusive thoughts want me to pet that so badly." And I was like, my intrusive thoughts. Because I feel like as adults, we read stuff that's like, don't let those intrusive thoughts, like it sounds really serious. And they were like, it is everything in my power to tell my intrusive thoughts that I am not allowed to pet the baboons right now. And I was like, that's so funny. So now, after 10 days of hearing, just funny like teenager speak all week, I that's what I think of is like those intrusive thoughts as a teacher automatically center ourselves. And they go like, because I'm already a person that lives like that, like that lives self-conscious and goes, oh no, they took 4 seconds to respond. Are you mad at me? Like I think that's how a lot of us are anyway, because we're overachievers, we work hard, we overperform, we underpromise, we exceed, and then we're like, oh my gosh, we're just trying to do the best we can. And then we hope it's good enough. Cause I'm also a person who fears like letting people down or disappointing people. But I think that's so many people in education. So then when a kid's just like, at your lesson or asleep, or they've got their AirPods hidden, behind their hair, which obviously is a struggle for me now. But like if it's like hidden here and they're like, wait, what? I mean, you immediately go 0 to 60, like take that personally. Cause the other thing we've been taught and fed over the years is be so engaging. They won't want
Oh,
to do
yeah.
anything else. Be so engaging. And you're like, I am literally competing with the entire internet.
Right. This
TV
and
show
that. Yeah.
ever existed, right here. Every movie that has ever existed, right?
Right.
Like it's right. Oh, your mom, right here. Your like every photo here. Like, oh my God, if you did a roll call for all the things that exist on this stinking thing, you're like, present, present. I mean, imagine sitting in seventh grade as we would have had to do with a camera, a VCR, a little TV, a like boom box, headphone. Hi,
I know. It's all right here.
it's all right here. And kids are just like, yeah, 1 second. And you're like, 1 second? Like, did you just 1 second me? But so
Right.
it's really hard. They've not lived without it. And that's absolutely the message from people who haven't taught in a long time sometimes or ever, where it's like, be so engaging that they'll be, just so hooked on the lesson. And you're like, yeah, I love that. In
Right.
theory, but like, that's really hard. So absolutely. And then we work so hard and there's so much work that I mean, most of the work goes on when the kids aren't around, because you've got to get ready so that you have work to do at work. Then you've got to take work home so that your work at work is ready for you to do the work at work. And then you have work after work. Like it never ends. So that's for me, just some of the reasons it automatically goes personal and shouldn't, but it totally does. You're totally right. And it's like,
Yeah.
it just cannot, it cannot. And we have to like, just get rid of it, but that's so hard. What are some ways that you find like you've matured over the years and reflected just in your professionalism that's made that easier?
Hmm. Um, I think if I can think of one particular way is, I mean, it goes back to, I know you said this earlier, is like, these are children.
Yeah.
Um, and I know, my previous school, we had student feedback. And
Right.
so twice a year, I'm going to say first semester and then second semester, um, and then I would do feedback on my own.
Right.
Um,
a couple times first quarter, especially if they're new, to me, and then at least once each quarter going forward.
Yeah.
And so
So
I
smart.
I really I had to really look at it as, okay, number one, these are, you know, 10, 11, 12-year olds, responding. And yes, they have been coached on, okay, this is the kind of feedback you give your teachers or whatnot. And number two, like, okay, Kia, you can either choose to take this personally, or you can look at this as like, okay, how can I grow? How can I
Right.
grow as a person? How can I grow, as a professional? And so and I think that was the thing for me that really, helped, especially with that first group that I taught sixth grade about 4 years ago. And so I remember I gave so many different forms, and I was nervous. I
Right.
was so nervous because again, being compared to the previous teacher, and
Oof.
so it's like coming in new, and I was so nervous, but there's a saying, like, you do it afraid. I did it anyway, because on the other side of what we may fear, like, there's a beautiful thing there. And so I kept doing it, and some of the kids were like, yeah, can we do more group work? Can we do more pair work? Or, so and so doesn't quite know. Can you slow down? Can you? And so over the years, I learned how to really take a look at trends, where
Yeah.
it was like, if I saw, like, hey, you're talking too fast, like, multiple times, I'm like, okay, I need to slow down. Or
Right.
if I saw, like, hey, can you use more English? Like 80% of the time, I was like, okay, well, that one, no,
Right.
we
Sorry.
are in Spanish class, and so it was a journey for me. It was a definite journey. And I know with this upcoming school year, this is probably something that I'm going to have to, go through again. And I think some of that too, like, the other part of it too is, like, as a professional and as a language educator, like, you know your craft,
Mm.
right? We have all this research out here. You're going to all these different PDs, you're getting ideas. And if you're putting your best foot forward each and every day and doing the best that you can,
Mm.
then okay, like, that's a start. Like,
Yeah.
you keep going, you really keep going.
Wow.
Um, and I don't know. I feel like I don't even know if I answered your question. Maybe I did,
Absolutely.
but
Absolutely. Well, and I had a conversation. You're saying the exact. It's so funny. Which was kind of, we were talking about a different thing. Um, Claudia Elliott and I a couple of weeks ago, and we ended up saying exactly what you're saying right now, which is so interesting to me. That also comes back to the same kind of thing of just the choice. Like we talked a lot about the choices and choosing to feel like choosing and building yourself up to feel confident about what you're doing in the classroom. Remember that Saturday Night Live skit where it's Michael Jordan, right? And we both love Michael Jordan. And he's in the mirror and he's like, I'm smart enough. I'm good enough. And by gosh, people like me. And they have him like coaching him on confidence, right? But he's like Michael freaking Jordan. I mean, it really is almost like that, where at the end of the day, exactly what you're saying. I think knowing that you did everything you could. I think we're also pretty honest with ourselves, just people are in general, like the kids when they grade themselves harsher, than you would have. And you're like, geez, 80. I was thinking like 94, but okay.
right,
Like
right.
you guys are some mean teachers.
I
Um,
know.
always I'm like, good grief. But if you like it, like
Right, right. It's
okay,
like, okay,
maybe that is the rubric. My bad. Maybe I am like getting soft in my old age, but it's really choosing to feel good about your teaching. And you're right. For me, that's totally kind of how that evolves to then you're not taking, yeah, comments from like a 12-year-old.
yeah,
Personally, where like at the end of the day, you have to go, get it together. It's a child who, yeah, is going more English, please. This is too much Spanish. And you're like, of course it is, because you all would take the whole class in English if you could. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
the other thing, so the confidence piece, but also the other thing that stood out to me from what you said is seeing that student feedback for better or for worse, or I'm going to take a step further too, seeing maybe being put on some kind of professional development plan or some kind of,
Yeah.
that's what it's called. Like in your setting, ours is called a PDP, professional development plan, but I've also seen it as just developmental plan. And I've been on one. And you talk about growth, like choosing, kind of getting in your feelings for like an hour, right? And being like, "Ooh," you know, whatever. It was super early in my career and they weren't wrong, but the delivery left a little something to be desired. So but that's fine. It was needed. And you know, I licked my wounds for a minute and then was like, all right, suck it up. You know what I mean? Like, get it together. You're kind of like, all right, here we go. And this is about to be, this is an opportunity. And I think that's the key. Like, that's what I hear you saying, is seeing that student feedback as a growth opportunity, not just, well, what do these kids know? You know? And then it's like, well, why did you ask them for feedback then? If you were going to read them and go, well, what do they know? What do these kids know? Girl, they're in the same
Right.
room all day. Like, they can give you some good insights. So I think all of that is super, super important. Like choosing certain
Yeah.
behavior mindsets for yourself, having the confidence and growing your own sort of accountability with yourself to like
Yeah.
walk the walk, talk the talk, you know, whatever. And then also just really seeing those uncomfortable parts and comfortable parts as opportunities just to get better at the end of the day, you know?
Yeah. I mean, 100%. And I love that you mentioned the PDP, the professional development
Yeah.
plan. Like I'll never forget. The first, I want to say within the 4 years I was at my previous school, the first year when I was new, like I'll never get my colleague slash friend, now, like he came in and I know he's a native speaker of the
Mm.
language and so I'll never forget he came in and he just said, yeah, department chair just wants me to be here to like listen. And I'll never forget, I was told like you need to use more Spanish.
Right.
And here I was, I thought I was like, well, I thought I was okay,
Doing
you
okay.
know?
Right.
Yeah, I was like, I thought I was fine, and she's just like, you need to use more Spanish and we need to hear more of the students and like their output and things
Yeah.
like that. And so I I remember that. And just like you, like I was just kind of like, wow, it's like I don't want to force if kids aren't ready, but then I remember I talked to my department chair after and I said, can you, give me some clarity? Like, what would you suggest? Like, are you asking this and blah, blah, blah. And so the following year, I just said, okay. And
No.
so that was like a step for me. Like, I remember day one, I started the class like in the target language. And I'm going to say I did before, but maybe it like just to another level. And um, made some tweaks, provided more scaffolding and some visuals. And, the following year, it was like my colleague was just like, oh my gosh, like the kids are great and they're just speaking, and that was a huge thing. And at one point, it was recommended like go to some classes, like go watch, your colleagues, teach. And that is that's such a gem to do. Like, if there's one thing I can really encourage, like teachers to do, is like if you and I get it, we all have our planning periods and different things like that. But even if you're not able to do it, within maybe like your PD time or your PLC, but just go watch like one of your colleagues like teach. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a language educator. Like it could be somebody that teaches social studies or science or history.
Great.
And I have gained like so much from that. I've just been like, oh, like that's a great idea. And I think with this upcoming school year, with me, being the newbie, um, I I am going to have to go, watch other teachers teach, and I think that that's great because two, that also gives me an idea of just like, okay, so where are we with, everything, and, how are the students responding? Do they respond to this more? Because at the end of the day, yes, you do want to be yourself in the classroom, not comparing, not thinking you need to be like so and so or this
Amen.
person or whatnot, but be yourself. But also, don't be afraid to take a look at, like, oh, you know what, maybe I need to take a look over here and see how I can add that into the sauce that I already have. So, but yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Reminding me of Thomas Sauer and Katrina Griffin's advice that's always the best PD is down the hall. Like some of the best PD is down the hall. Like you said, any content area, any, kind of thing, like, and for better or for worse, right? You might see some things and go, I use it
Yeah.
that way, but let me keep that to myself. I've
Right.
or someone, makes you step up your game. Regardless, it's a reflection. Honestly think too, when we get in each other's classrooms with regularity or not, or whatever, everybody wins. The kids see their teachers hanging out and learning from each other, which I think is professionally a really strong thing to do.
Yeah.
You also align better. I mean, I can remember I worked with a colleague who taught the upper levels, and she would be very frustrated in like language, like not course team meetings, but like not leveled, but language, like when all of the Spanish teachers were together, all 8 of us were together, and she'd be very frustrated because she'd say, "Oh my gosh," like we start and then it would bring up these other like kind of emotional conversations, which are the ones that we mentioned before, which are like, these kids aren't ready and they don't know. And then all that, right? Again, you're like, pew, pew, like those like TikToks where they're like batting away all of the things. You're like, don't take it personally. They don't know Sarah and a Star. They don't know the preterite. You're like, I promise I taught that. Does one kid know it? That means I taught it, right? So it would bring up some other things. And I was like, this is avoidable. So in my efforts to align the department, that was one of my things, was going to observe them. Because one of the things they would say was, I mean, day one, they don't know any Spanish, obviously hyperbole, but that's how it felt to her, right? So I went and I observed, so much information gleaned, so much information gleaned. Her Spanish is beautiful. She's an amazing teacher, like all the things. But I realized, oh, I'm leaning too heavily on cognates in levels 1 and 2. So I'm kind of
Mhm.
babying it down without realizing I'm babying it down. And then when I'm scaffolding kind of unnaturally. So I'm saying things that like a native speaker wouldn't say, the in the name of understanding. You know what I mean? And so I'm like, oh, the way almost like I was oversimplifying, and I was using like, I don't know, I wasn't holding kids accountable for, no, you need to work to understand me. I was kind of going down. And one example of that was just, she was going, she'd say, okay, take out this, take out this. Todos entienden, me entienden, me entienden, todos me entienden. And they were looking at her like she had sprouted like another head. And I realized I have never with these kids used entender, because I want them, ironically, to understand. So I use comprender way more, because I know that they're going to go, oh, okay, comprendo. Yeah, whatever. And I'm enabling them to not have to learn more complicated vocabulary, or honestly, more oft used vocabulary. Like I've heard way more native speakers use entender. I don't know if you have too, but like hardly ever. I mean, you could say like, no comprendo, and they'd be like, oh, okay, I'll whatever. But entender, it's like always entender. And so little things like that, just being in my colleague's room, seeing those former students, them seeing that she and I had a rapport, and I'm like, buenos dias, and I'm like, we gotta like whatever, seeing them again, doing all those things where even if you're included in the lesson, again, kids win. Like that's just a good professional practice. And I think you're absolutely spot on with like the impact it can have, the positive impact it can have.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
you're right. I think we also don't make time for it. We're like, oh, I really like my planning. I mean, we don't have to go in with like a freaking clipboard and like a rubric. It's like, take your laptop, check your email, just be in there and realize what's going on. Be like, oh, level 3. The other thing was she gives all the instructions in Spanish. I didn't realize that. That's not
Mhm.
going to die on. So I give all instructions in English. But am I setting kids up for success? No. when I mean, I realized that in that moment when I was like, oh, we might need to change that a little bit because she's going, saquen los lápices y, vayan a la página 32 or whatever. And they're all like, what? Then they look at you and you're like, uh-oh. It's like,
It's like,
that's right. Lo siento, clase. That can make you feel like that can make them feel kind of like that time that they enjoyed together and all those things you built up, like you said, with second language acquisition and all of those like approaches and getting them confident, getting them feeling good about making mistakes. It's normal, all that kind of thing. That sometimes goes out the window because kids are like, wait a minute, I had 100 in Spanish too. What's up with this? And now you've also undermined your colleague in a way that is hard to tell until it's too late, I think. You know what I mean?
mhm. Yeah, yeah, 100%. Like I want to say all I used was entender.
Oh, good
That
for you.
was it. No comprender. Like,
A sucker for
and
comprender.
yeah, I know. Like, eventually the students were like, comprendo, entiendo. I'm like, yeah, sí, significa lo mismo. Yeah. So they're
Right.
like, oh, you know. Um, but yeah, like, I mean, 100%. Like, I think about like the cognates, and I I know personally, like with the setting I was in, I really didn't use a whole lot of
Mm,
cognates. I want to say the only time I really did was if we had like someone like coming in new, like into our
yeah.
program, and I wanted to kind of like assess and see where they were at. Um, I'll never forget at one point I gave my fifth graders that I had last year like a reading, and it was either reading or a podcast, and I was like, okay, this is an optional option, like go ahead and do this reading, or either you all could listen to a podcast, for 10 minutes or something. And I'll never forget one of the fifth graders came back and said like, yeah, I really didn't like that. And I was like, well, what happened? And he's just like, it was too easy. And I was like,
Oh.
okay. I was like, all right, well, moving on. I was like, okay.
And
So
you
we.
have 100, right?
I
Like,
know, right. But again, it's like depending on where you're at and students that you
yeah,
have, it's going to be different, and you're going to have to start,
yeah,
where they're at, and eventually, move them up and,
yeah.
level up and make sure that you're, continuing to do that. So, yeah.
Well, and choosing to change too, like choosing to
Yeah.
not stay. I feel like we're also raised as teachers to like be waiting for that like like the holy grail year of years is when you have the exact same thing you had last year, right? Like either the level or and it's like, oh, like I can finally use everything I used last year. And I wish somebody had told me 15 years ago, like, not a thing. It's not a thing. Because like I feel like every year I'm like, all right, I can use this next year and constantly changing and seeing change
Oh, yeah.
as a good thing and choosing to change, I think is really important. That's what I hear like you saying from that too of yeah, like, oh, it was too easy. Great. Well then, like let's find something a little harder, whatever. I mean, that's such great feedback. And how easy would it be to be in like an unhealthy place? And again, like that confidence, like the opposite of all those, like feeling insecure, feeling defensive, feeling, this, that, and the other, and being like, oh, it was too easy. Well, okay, Timmy, Tommy, next time, class, Timmy, you know what I mean? And just going like off the rails, like, or all of a sudden somehow like that's insulting. Like, I've totally been in classrooms where that happened and suddenly that honest feedback that is supposed to be like, that's awesome. You knew all the things. Like, that's really exciting. High five, Timmy Tommy, like becomes again somehow about us. And I
Yeah.
think that's something that we all do more than we realize and definitely more than we should, unless we're aware of it, and it's something we're working on. It's hard though.
Yeah. It's definitely hard. And then, being open to, having that conversation of accountability, either amongst, your colleagues or your department. And it's like, hey, just, we want to go in this direction,
Right. Oh yeah.
and then, asking the quote unquote, what can be interpreted as uncomfortable questions, like, tell me, why are you doing this? And how do you think that this would benefit, and what do you see, and then not, and not getting defensive about that, either. And I feel like it's, that can be challenging too.
Yeah.
Um, and it depends on personality, as well. I mean, me, I'm the type of person, if something's going on, just tell me,
Right.
you
Same.
know.
Otherwise, I'm gonna
It's
go
like,
up at 10 times worse than it was.
yeah,
Just tell me. Mhm.
yeah, just tell me what it is, so we can work on it, so we can fix it, so I can do what, I need to do. And it took me a while to get to this point. I used to be incredibly fearful of, like, oh my God,
Same.
feedback, but again, going back to the fact that it being a journey and really looking at it as like, okay, this is a way that I can grow,
Yeah,
um,
absolutely.
and being able to get to a place of, embracing that, and then going back to what you were saying earlier about the students, like, is this benefiting the students, and is this preparing them for what they are going to be able to do, you
Absolutely.
know in the end.
Well, and yes, absolutely. And I feel like so much of that comes from how personal language teaching is. Like teaching in general is personal, but then language teaching to me is much like music, teaching art, like these performance-based subjects, which immediately what's just front and center, your ability in whatever the medium is, if it's language, if it's art, if it's music. I mean, I can't imagine being like a band director and being like, oh, but I don't play any instruments, But like, what? Like, I need you to play a few, right? But how many times do we get asked as a language teacher when you say, oh, I'm a Spanish teacher, I'm a French teacher, or whatever? They go, oh my God, are you fluent? And you're like, yeah, I hope there's a high degree of fluency.
Right.
That's I like, of course, right? Or like an art teacher who's like, no, I don't paint or draw. It's like that's not a thing, right? But if it is, or if you did doubt your abilities, like that makes very personal work even more personal and super
Yeah.
vulnerable. And I feel like being a native speaker, being a heritage speaker, being neither, like all of those. Did you study abroad? Did you not? What's your travel experience? Are you self-conscious about any of that? If it's the lack thereof, all of those to me are like that little, remember Trivial Pursuit, the board game, and it had those little colorful
Yep.
pies, that like as you scored, you put them in. It to me, those are all those little like pie pieces of like your little game board thing. Like, and everyone's are different. It's like a DNA. It's like a fingerprint, So if somebody's got, I mean, everyone's little like teaching profile is different. Like native speaker, 15 years experience, grew up in the Dominican, da 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 da. And then somebody else is just, it's really hard to align everybody on those
Yeah.
different things when all of those things are like tied to your identity, tied to your personality, tied to so many things that you hold near and dear. So you just literally can't understand why someone wouldn't see it that way, or like, like, but they don't know Sarah and a star. And you're like, well, it's late acquired. It's hard. That's a hard structure.
Right.
I'm still learning Sarah and a star.
Right. It's like,
Yeah, I go out to eat, somebody says, la comida estuvo riquísima. And I'm like, why is that estuvo? Like, I will,
right, right. You're like,
will never understand. And I will never understand why it's está. Like in the present, I will never understand estar for food ever. I just won't. Like, I kind of do, but I'm like, no, I hate it. Like disagree. Just in my mind, that's a hard thing to learn.
yeah,
And just so much of that is so personal. And then if you feel like someone's saying something or approaching you and you're trying to align as a course team or whatever, and you're like, well, I'd really like to teach them this word or this way or whatever, and it's like it doesn't jive, you're like, this is a personal affront. Like, I cannot
yeah,
believe. One thing I've seen, so I don't know if you agree with this, but I know you're also a prolific sharer of like resources, ideas, reflections on like so many amazing accessible platforms. I find that sharing resources is one way to kind of not break down those walls, but kind of scale the wall with some people. Because I think that sometimes there's a lot of rhetoric in teaching and a lot of people who are just like, do it this way, but they don't show you how. And so I always appreciate like somebody shares something. I'm like, oh my gosh, share this with everybody because same, you know, if I liked it, you could edit it, you could tweak it. We all have those different environments, etc. Do you find that in the same way that observing other colleagues is helpful, sharing resources is helpful to bring reticent colleagues to the table or to kind of help align people in that way?
Yes, I do. I definitely do. I know with when I think about like sharing with colleagues that I previously like worked with, everybody would always accept it, like, oh my God, like, this is great and whatnot. And then too, like I try to also be mindful too about like not, I don't want to say oversharing, but like oversharing in terms of like, hey, here you go. So then that way, because I don't
Right.
want the other person to think like,
Dang, she
okay, is
doesn't
she
think
trying
I
to tell
do.
me something about
That's
like my
right.
teaching, like
Think
what's,
is of value.
I
Like,
know like what's going on, but um, as far as other platforms that I've been on, I think that it's an incredible tool too. Sharing resources and then being honest and authentic about like how you came to use this particular
yeah,
resource, and how it's helped you,
yeah,
and being able to, share that story, because behind every resource, behind every strategy, like there's always a story.
yeah,
And people want to hear that story. Like, well,
absolutely.
did it work? And how did you come to, this particular decision?
Right.
You know, I'll never forget, I was asked, I can't say which interview, but I was asked, and speaking of, this reminds me of the identity that you spoke about, but like, I was asked in an interview where I was given like a list of like vocabulary words.
Mhm.
And so in my current practice, like the only lists I should say that my students have ever been provided have been like on Quizlet. If I say, okay, review this for like 10 minutes, but I had stopped, passing out a huge list because it's like for one, like I don't want it to be overwhelming, for the students. And two, it's just we would talk about so many things in class, just vocab all over the wall that I was like, for me, like I wanted to get away from the list. And I'll never forget, like, I was shown this list and it was just like, hey, like what lesson would you come up with? And it was literally like I could like it felt like somebody was like punching me.
Right. You're like,
I
huh,
was like, and I'm sitting there and I still had to have a smile on my face, like,
well,
oh,
right.
and so then I immediately, I could just hear myself like, "You get it together, like get it together," like
Get it
you're sitting
together.
here, it's a whole team of people waiting for your response.
Yep.
And I'll never forget, I paused, and it goes back to, you know, being able to ask questions and being able to ask, certain questions that might be a little challenging for people to ask. And and I said, okay, I said, is this something that is given out, at the beginning of class, and it's like, well, typically, and then I remember one teacher was just like, well, no, you don't have to, they can get it later on. And, and so I'll just never forget that because for me, seeing that, it almost brought back like just kind of like a triggered
Yes.
memory,
You're like,
you know,
oh,
where it's just like for, like other teachers in the room, it was just like, oh, this is like what we do, this is what we use, and and so I'll never and then I remember after that, after I asked, like, is this passed out to everybody? When do you normally do that? I just sat there and said, well, honestly, I looking at this vocab, this reminds me of an identity thing, and this is how I would go about it,
right.
and I just remembered, like, I was feeling a little nervous, like, I don't know, we'll see,
Yeah.
but
Oh,
everybody was, very, very receptive to it,
wow.
and again, it was one of those like, And you could just kind of see on the faces, they were like, oh,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
like, okay, like, all right, so again, like going back to like learning how to ask those questions
Yeah.
of, things like that. But
That
yeah,
also speaks though to how strong your like character and integrity are that you would even think of their feeling like I don't want to, I don't want to come across like you said, where you're like I don't want to come like I don't want to offend everybody in this like interview, and I don't want to go vocab list. Why? I haven't. You're
right,
correct. Like as I clutch my non-existent pearls, right? Where you're like
right, like,
never, and it's like because there are absolutely people who would do that, and
yeah,
I just think who among us is so, proficient in their practice or whatever that yeah, that they can't stop and reflect and think like, gosh, my first thought was to totally judge this thing, but there's got to be merit in there somewhere, and there
yeah,
are some people who would have that reaction and go and just scoff, right? And like
yeah,
immediately like what's that supposed to do to those other people? Like makes them feel small.
yeah,
It also kind of sounds like you don't know what you're talking about because like you couldn't come up with a lesson or like an idea, or you couldn't pause and really be thoughtful about it. You just automatically like put down the thing, you know. That's super hard as opposed to your reaction, which is like, well, we got to play nice in the sandbox and we got to make do somehow. And that's
yeah,
honestly like I look back at some resources like that are very sort of like legacy practices. And you know what? If the people incorporating those kind of like that kind of teaching, were absolutely doing the best they could. And if they hadn't shared stuff like that early on in my career, I wouldn't have stayed. Like, because those first couple years for me were like, all right, we're in, Buen Viaje, page 12, and then tomorrow,
right,
page 13. Guess what? No, we're not going to do page 14. I'm changing it up. We're going to skip it. Page 15, and that was it. Like, that's about as sexy as it got. And I absolutely understand people who they just do that like every year because it's hard. Like teaching a language is hard.
yeah,
Revamping all of the things we're talking about are really hard. Like I get the choice to go, oof, it's a lot. If there's something I am going to do a vocab list. I am going to try an IPA, but I am going to give out a vocab list or I am going to do X, Y, and Z. Okay. Whatever. To your point about like the identity theme, like there's something we can find usually in almost everything that everybody can use or that can work for everybody, and that's just it, but it's hard, and it's
yeah,
hard to make all those stuff. I think of the novice levels, it's hard to weave some of those topics together. Unit one's always like greetings, colors, numbers, classes, I mean, just all this weird stuff. And you're like,
right,
like, how am I going to make this make sense? You work it out. You do somehow.
yeah,
What
yeah.
else can you do? Gosh, I didn't realize it's been an hour. As we,
Gosh.
I know, I'm like, oh no.
Wow.
Dog just barked at something, of course. Because of course they did. They're like, oh, it's time to make noise. Um, as we wrap up, is there anything like any other when you think of reflections, and you think of like we've talked about professionalism, sharing, just self development and growth and all those kind of things, and knowing that again you're a prolific sharer and just a prolific giver and participator in PD, is there anything you would recommend for people who feel like this is just a lot, like when they start reflecting they get overwhelmed, um anything you would recommend as first steps, next steps, and maybe what's filling your cup these days? Because maybe some of that, like you've got so much experience that maybe those are one in the same. If people are feeling stuck or if you yourself have felt stuck, any recommendations as to get like kind of unstuck or get rejuvenated or kind of professionally, I don't know, stimulated after having a lot of experience or wanting to make some changes, but not knowing where to start?
Yeah. I actually took some notes. So I don't like
Not surprised.
um
Yes.
so I think too, I like that you mentioned too about how like some can, feel very, very overwhelmed by this, especially if you are, you're thinking about it, you're being very introspective about it. You're like, oh gosh, like I don't know, like how do I, I would definitely recommend like, talking to someone like a fellow teacher, a colleague that you know you trust, even an instructional coach.
Yeah.
And I think that that can be very helpful. And I say that because I've spoken with quite a few teachers this year who just like, hey, Kia, can I talk to you? I want to make sure I'm on the right page, or going in the right direction. I've been thinking about this,
Mm,
and this is what I've been doing. What do you think?
right.
And 90, I want to say 100% of the time with the conversations that I've had this year, I've been like, oh my gosh, this is great. Like,
Right.
you're on the right track. If you're looking to go in this direction, I would suggest this, because that validation is really, really important, is key. And with that too, you're able to link that validation to, maybe having like some sort of like an accountability partner, just like, hey, this is what I'm thinking, but I know that, this is overwhelming for me. Can you talk me through this, or do you have information on this, or who can you direct me to? And not being afraid to ask for help.
Mm,
Um, I just, that is like huge. And I think as teachers, like we're very, very helpful. But I think sometimes too, especially when we talk about like the change and making changes and reflecting, if you're used to doing something a certain way for so long, like it's easy for you to get in a place where it's like, yeah, I really don't want to ask anybody for help because I don't want to look like I don't know what I'm doing, and things like that. But taking the step of seeking out either the colleague, someone you trust, a coach, friend, or someone that knows someone else, like, hey, I really want to work on this, but I don't know how. It just makes a world of a difference of not being afraid to seek out, not being afraid to seek out.
yeah. No,
Um, yeah,
absolutely. That
yeah.
keyword of trust is so important too, because if you've ever been burned or, just feel like you trusted somebody and then later felt you shouldn't have for whatever reason or felt betrayed or all those kind of things, it can be really hard. It's like a breakup. It can be really hard to like trust again, and
Yeah.
or if you haven't had that and you're like listening right now going like, oh no, do the people like, do I have trustworthy people, in my circle? That's such a valid reflection too of like, whom are you trusting with what information? And especially at work, I find so many times easier. What's that verse? A prophet's never a prophet in his hometown, So if you're trying to
Oh,
teach,
girl,
I know, which is
can
the
write a book about that
worst.
one.
You just want to be a prophet.
Anyway,
Like, guys, you're my people. You should, but it's true, right? You could say something as department chair for 10 years and then bring in somebody outside who says the same thing, and everyone's like, you're like, what? Like I was saying this, but it's true, So
yeah,
even to me, there's so much value too in getting exactly like you said, seeking outward once you've done the internal work and you're like, okay, I think I'm on the right track, but I can't tell. I'm ready to make some changes, or I'm ready to like keep doing what I'm doing and just getting better because there's so much merit to just strengthening the things you're already good at. Because your weaknesses are going to come along with them usually, right? So it's like also seeking multiple different perspectives. And for me, state associations can be so good about that, like
yes,
making those connections, even if it's not the people themselves. They can at least, you can find somebody and go, hey, do you guys have like mentoring? Do you have any
yes,
kind of like at the conference, is there a track or a strand where I can follow like this is for new teachers? Or can I just literally open up the program schedule PDF and do, control F or command F and find the word IPA, like, or technology? Like if there's something I want to get better at, what's my best session choices? What are my best, like, help me out here? Because all of those people work on the program. They work on, we've talked about like area. Illinois has like area regions. I think I follow like 4 of them and I don't know which one I'm missing, but I always see, I'm always like, oh wait, region 6 did something again, or region 4, whatever. But I think there's like one middle number that's missing. I didn't follow them all, but things like that, like each state's a little different. And then the region organizations, like all of those kind of things, because it's not somebody in your hometown, like it's not somebody in your backyard. So if you're somebody who feels like, oh no, I can trust no one I work with, or I'm the only course team one, like, so I am the language department, like all of those super common circumstances, there's other people who can give you advice. And then maybe you feel, to me, that I feel like less pressure sometimes when I talk to people who I don't work with directly every day, because you're like, it's just different. They're an outside perspective. And to me, those people, because they're not who you're talking about, or they're not in the situation, man, they'll call you out too and be like, no, I think you're being oversensitive about that. And because they don't care, right? They're not trying to like protect anybody's feelings. They don't know anybody involved. That can be super helpful too, to go, am I? Like, yeah, I think you might need to calm it down. Oh, okay. Huh. All right. Because maybe a friend would have been like, no, all of them are wrong, or whatever. So
Right.
which might be the truth, but who knows? It's all of our situations are so unique and it's all so personal. So I agree. Finding somebody who you can talk to about the things and go, I really want to get better at assessment. I really want to get better at, that vocab list. I'm handing these kids this paper with 112 words. They're all freaking out. Then I'm freaking out, like, help me. What are some different ways? Yeah. I love it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's huge. And then too, I mean, there's a lot of PLCs on social media, I know with different conferences that I've, gone to, oftentimes, I kind of forget. I'm like, hey, are you on, X or whatever the heck it's called now? I'm just like, sorry, we're not talking about that.
Twitter
But anyway,
forever. Twitter forever.
Twitter forever. Are you on Facebook? Do you, and sometimes I get like, oh yeah, I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, I can normally direct them toward a certain group, follow this group, and then sometimes it's like, well, no, I'm not really on, so it's like I try to encourage, like, there's a lot of ideas and people share a ton of resources if you get connected with, this group. So yeah.
And that's the thing too, is people share so many resources, which I know like that can be overwhelming, but it's like, pick one, you don't need it. Rome wasn't built in a day. Like you don't have to change, like next year is going to be the best year ever. And I'm going to fix all these things. I mean, we don't do that in any other area of our life. We don't go like, you know what I'm going to do? We're going to read the whole house, just the whole house. We're going to read it's going to be done in a week. Like it's going to be what? That's not how that works. Like, no.
Right.
So I agree. Yeah, absolutely. And being kind to yourself to take your time. Like,
take your time.
Doing fine. Right. Oh,
yeah.
I so appreciate you. Thank you for joining us today. And thanks for going a little bit into the after party too. I know. Yay.
I know. Yay. Thank you.
Oh, love it. So we'll post the recording. And if you think of any resources, I'll put in like our 2 state organizations just as examples, but if there's any other resources, or I know, again, in your sharing and blogging and everything else, that you've got so many just nuggets of wisdom that are like, just a subtle, you're like the queen of like one subtle blog post. And I'm like, this changed my life, like, you'll be like, just some thoughts on whatever. And I'm like, oh my gosh, yes. Like I'm reading it going like, yes. Oh, I never thought of it that way. What have I been doing? My life is a lie. So if there's anything you think about for reflecting and all those kind of things, I can add them too. And then we'll get those all put in the same place.
Yay. Okay.
Awesome.
Sounds good.
Thanks so much. And thanks everybody for joining us. And if you're listening to this later, thanks for joining us that way too.
Yes. Thank you all.
Thank you, friend. Bye.
Bye.